Principally, my grandfather was lost on the vessel, and my father used to take me out on a motorboat, which is his own motorboat, out past the Iolaire, the rock, the Beasts of Holm. And he never mentioned anything until I was about 10 years old that his father had actually died in a vessel there. I thought he had just died in the First World War. And my sister was 7 years older, and she was, well into her teens before she found out the truth about it. But apparently, things happened like that in the First World War. People just didn't want to talk about it. And even the Second World War, they talked about it when they came home on leave, but once the war was over, I think it was the survivors, I feel by survivors that why were they chosen to survive and others died in a tragedy where the vast majority died. It's like a guilt complex. And I think the children that are left behind, they lost a parent. And in my father's case, his mother was already dead, so he was an orphan. He just had his brother, and they were split up after the tragedy. So that hit home to me, and I always wanted to find out more about it. And it was only from the 1960s onwards that little bits, snippets of information came about, and I think there's still a lot more to come about. The recent book by John MacLeod was extremely interesting, but I think it only covered parts of the island, didn't cover all of the men aboard, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cover every single man that went aboard, whether he died or whether he survived. And we also want to cover the children of the families. Now, one or two children died just before the fathers came home, and some were born afterwards. And so to say there was an exact figure on the day that the Iolaire went down isn't correct. But we're trying to list them all with their dates of birth, etc., and what happened to them. I think there was only one large village that wasn't affected, and that was the village of Tongue. And apparently all the men there went aboard the Sheila, which was the mailboat that set sail just shortly after the Iolaire departed for Stornoway. Well, I think it was just, I think once they got on board, it was more or less like, there's 2 or 3 buses, they jumped aboard, except in this case it was a couple of vessels, and they were just keen to get back for the new year and to see their families. And I think it was a pretty average voyage until suddenly there was a bang, and the vessel went on its side, and they suddenly realised that they were in dire straits, because they really couldn't see exactly where they were, and because although the vessel was lit up, Stornoway was to port of them, and they were just seeing flashes from the Arnish lighthouse. It was very, very difficult for them to see, because there was the roar of the crashing waves against the rocks, and it was only when the Veery lights went up that they started seeing exactly where they were in relation to the land, because the searchlight was broken down. I think every Remembrance Day a lot of thought is given to the Iolaire, because up until that point over 1,000 men had been lost in the war, and then to lose another 200 effectively, well, I think it's 201, including the crew, of course. That was the final kick from the horse, as it were, to an island that was already down, crying in despair of the lost people aboard the vessel. And there was also, I think, the tragic case of one daughter who died a day after he and her father had died, and she was buried with him. And I think that was one of the most saddest cases of all for the family that were left behind. I think they thought they were safe. They were in naval hands. They'd been in naval hands for 4.5 years on the various ships they sailed on. And why should they fear anything coming into their own home port? Until suddenly that large bang. And perhaps 1 or 2 men out on the deck might have said, she's a bit close, etc., because we'd hear waves crash on the shore. But they would have thought the naval commanders would know where they were going.